Welcome to the WindowBook Incorporated video on creating a freight table, featuring WindowBook's powerful post pre-sort software, DAT-MAIL Toolbox. My name is Monica Lundquist. I'm Postal Affairs and Technical Support Manager here at WindowBook, and I'll be guiding you through the process of creating a freight table. If you are subscribed to DAT-MAIL Toolbox and are using the Planalyzer module for dropship analysis, one of the tasks that you will likely need to do is to create a freight table. Freight tables are important in dropship analysis as they provide the data with which the software can accurately apply the shipping and handling costs, which are incurred by the mailer to take the mail from the mail preparation facility to the various additional postal entry points. Freight tables include such data as the freight costs, surcharges, administrative charges, and so forth that are involved in transporting the mail from the mail preparation facility to those additional postal entry points. Dropshipping of mail results in postage discounts, or it may be used to improve control over the delivery time of the mail. Although you can certainly process jobs in DAT-MAIL Toolbox without using freight tables, doing so will give you only the postage savings portion of the dropship analysis, which is only part of the picture. You really need to use freight tables in order to complete the analysis by including the shipping costs. So, what situations would arise where a software user needs to create a freight table? Well, if you're doing your own shipping to postal entry points, you would need to create freight tables to reflect your shipping costs to each of those entry points. If you are a logistics provider, you will need to create freight tables for the pricing that you provide to your various clients for the shipping costs of shipping that mail to those entry points. If you are a mail service provider who contracts with logistics providers for this service, you may need to create freight tables for each logistics provider with which you do business. Or there may be multiple freight tables from a given logistics provider. For example, there may be one freight table for letter-sized mail, which takes up more room on the trailer but is lighter in weight, and there may be a separate freight table for flat size and parcel mail, which is more dense and heavy. If you are reviewing a number of proposals from various logistics providers, it's quite handy to create freight tables for each proposal so that you can do comparative dropship analysis. You may even use different freight tables for different clients or jobs. Whatever the reason for creating a freight table, WindowBook's DAT-MAIL Toolbox software allows you to easily create as many freight tables as you need. Now let's switch over to DAT-MAIL Editor with Toolbox, and I'll show you an existing freight table so you can see what one looks like. You can see there are 4 tabs here, and this is for the different types of postal facilities that can be used for drop shipping. First tab here is NDC, or Network Distribution Center. Second one is SCF, or Sectional Center Facility. Third one is DDU, or Destination Delivery Unit, and the last one is ADC, or Area Distribution Center. And you can see within these tabs that the entry facility names are listed with the zip code information. There's also freight charge information here, entry point minimum information, administrative charge information, and some shipping information. And we'll go through all of those in more detail in just a moment. So, now that you've seen what one looks like, how do you go about creating a freight table? Well, as with all WindowBook software, we offer a lot of flexibility in that regard. There are a number of different ways and locations in which you can create a freight table. So the first one we're going to talk about is creating one from scratch. You can also copy an existing freight table and make some edits and save it to a new one. And you can also import a freight table from another source, and I'll show you those as well. So let's start with making one from scratch. Let's go to the toolbox and click on Maintain Freight Tables. And this time, since we're going to be able to create a new one here, we're going to click on Insert. Here you can name your freight table here, whatever makes sense to you. Let's call this one our video freight table. And also here you can assign this freight table certain clients if it's that specific, just by clicking on the button here and getting to your client list. or even a job if it's that specific. You can do that here as well. Here you can see 4 tabs that allow for some general information to be populated for this freight table that we're creating. The first one is called the General tab. Here you can populate a date. This would be the last ship date that was used for this particular freight table. You just click on the calendar and pick a date here if you'd like to do that. You can also input here a fuel surcharge. Many logistics providers, rather than trying to deal with all the fluctuations in fuel prices in their base rates, they use a fuel surcharge instead, and that fluctuates on a weekly basis. So let's say for our example, we're going to use a 30% fuel surcharge. And you can also click here if you want that surcharge to apply only after the minimum charges kick in. We'll talk about minimums in just a moment. You can also plug in your origin zip code here. So I'll do that. And then if you have instances where you need to apply some freight charges to your origin mail, which is not very typical, but it can apply in cases, say for example, if you've got to take your mail to a local post office for entry, there might be some freight charges involved there that you might want to include in your analysis here. So you have the opportunity to plug that in if you like. The next tab here is the tare weight tab, and tare weight is the weight of the containers that the mail is in. So you can see there's tare weight here for sacks, trays, pallets, and so forth. And this is automatically populated by default from the tare weights that you have set up in your program setup in DAT-MAIL. So it makes it very easy to do that because it's automatically populated. But if you do want to override any of this information, all you have to do is highlight it and type in the new information. The next tab is the Comments tab, and this is just reference information for you. Anything that makes it easy to reference this particular freight table. Could be a list of clients for which this applies. It could be the name of your logistics provider and maybe the expire date of the contract with them. Could be your mailing locations that use this freight table. Anything that makes sense and references it easily for you. Then the last tab here is for calculation options. This allows you to select whether you want your freight costs and your administrative costs to be calculated using gross weights or net weights. Gross weights would be the weight of the mail plus the weight of the containers, which is where the tare weights come in. And again, you can make this selection for both your freight costs and your administrative costs. Down below here, you'll see some radio buttons for static, dynamic, and dictated freight tables. And this allows you to select the type of freight table that you're going to be creating. A dynamic freight table means that you are going to populate your freight table with all the viable Postal Service entry points that exist. A static freight table is more limited entry points in your freight table. So usually the best way to do this is to start with a dynamic method of populating your freight table with all the possible postal entry points that there are, and then deleting the ones that you don't want. A dictated plan is populated with either a static or dynamic amount of entry point locations, but the difference is that the dictated plan uses no minimum logic. In other words, your mail.dat file will be processed to every entry point in your table regardless of any savings or minimum requirements. This type of plan is usually used when clients request that their mail be drop shipped no matter what the cost, and that's typically used for very time-sensitive type mailings in which the delivery is more important than the cost. So for purposes of our demonstration today, I'm going to select dynamic. And now that we've got this more general information populated, we can click on the View Freight Table Details to plug in all the detailed information. Now you'll notice that we're back to the 4 types of postal facility tabs that we talked about before, but you'll see that they're all blank. And this allows you to populate these with the facilities that you like. And again, as I mentioned earlier, the easiest way to do this is to populate them with all the possible entry points. To do this, you will click on the tab, let's use the NDC tab right here, and then click on the Populate NDC List. Once you do that, you'll see that all of the possible NDCs, and in this particular case also ASFs or auxiliary service facilities, are included in this list. That gets populated into this table. Now this information comes from the Postal Service, and it comes from the Facility Access and Shipment Tracking System, or FAST. So you want to make sure that you've got your destination data information updated in DAT-MAIL before you start on this process to make sure that you're using the most recent facility information. So let's go ahead and click on each one of these tabs and populate all of the possible postal facilities for those. Now I left the DDU tab for last, and that is because that operates a little bit differently than the other tabs. And the reason for that is because there are over 30,000 DDUs across the country. So rather than trying to populate this and making a very cumbersome, lengthy table here with all 30,000 facilities, we've used instead a Populate DDU by Zip Range button here. And that's not only to prevent a real cumbersome freight table, but also because most of the time when you're drop shipping to DDUs, it's for regional type mail, which is more geographically concentrated in nature. So you're only going to be using just a very small portion of those 30,000 possible DDUs. So let's go ahead and click on that. And again, I'm going to use my local zip codes. And here you want to put in your range of 5-digit zips that you want to use. So I'm going to say that I want to do 640-100 to 64199. And then click on Process. And now you can see that all of those DDUs within that zip range that I just indicated have been populated here. Now these are all showing up in red because we don't have any detailed information such as freight information populated yet. So let's go back to the NDC and go ahead and do that. And we'll select a single entry point first to do. Let's use the top one here, Springfield, and click on the Change button. This brings up 4 tabs that allow for more detailed information to be plugged into your freight table. The first tab here is the freight information. Here you can select the method by which your freight calculations will take place. We offer a number of different options here: per hundredweight, per pallet, flat rate, per 1,000 pieces, and per pound. For our example, we're going to use per hundredweight, and we're going to assume that to Springfield it's going to cost us $5 per hundredweight. So we plug that in. Also here you can put in any minimum charges that might apply. Many logistics providers have a minimum. Let's say that it's $25 to go to this particular entry point. And also any drop charges. Let's say if they've got a truckload of mail that's got multiple postal facilities that they're going to drop off in a sequence, and let's say that drop charge is $10. The next tab here is entry point minimums, and here is where you can work with different types of minimum logic to be used by the software when making its entry point analysis. You can leave it with the default, which is no minimum constraints, or you can put in any type of minimums that you want to put in here, and very typically people will put in, say for example, a number of containers or pallets. Let's say that for our example we want to have at least 1 pallet to an entry point before the software considers it. And let's also say that we want to have at least $10 of savings. Now you can use as many of these scenarios as you want, but the more of them you use, the more limiting is going to be your analysis. In other words, you're going to have fewer entry points recommended the more minimums that you put in here. So we recommend that you don't use a whole lot of them. It's usually best to do some what-if analysis. You can create several freight tables using different types of minimums and do some what-if analysis to make the final determination of what works best for your organization. The next tab here is administrative charges. Many mail service providers do charge an administrative charge for coordinating dropship mail, and that's just because there are usually additional costs for that, such as specialized software, additional material handling with loading and unloading and staging the mail, paper, clearance documents, the 8125s, things of that nature. So we're going to assume for our example today that we're going to use the same calculation method as our freight, which was per hundredweight, and that we're going to charge $1 per hundredweight for that administrative charge. Then the last tab here is the shipping defaults, and here you can put in some transit information if you know it. For example, if you know how much time that it takes your logistics provider to go from your facility to NDC in Springfield, you can put that in here in number of days. Or if you're using a consolidator and you know the transit time from your facility to the consolidator, you can also put that in here. So let's just go ahead and plug in 1 and 3 for that particular facility. And then you can also indicate what your operating hours are with your consolidator. As far as ship days are concerned, it defaults to all 7 days of the week, but if some of those are not applicable for your consolidator, you just uncheck those. So let's go ahead and use 7 days for our example. And now that we've got all of that populated, let's go ahead and click on OK. And now you'll see that that particular entry point has turned black, which means that we have entered in the detailed information. Now you might be thinking to yourself, oh my gosh, this is pretty tedious. I'm going to have to go through and do that for every single one of these entry points in every one of these tabs. Well, we have made that easier for you by putting in these copy buttons here. And most typically used is the copy to all button, although you can copy just the last rate if you'd like to. So let's say, for example, that we want to go ahead and include all these minimums. Let's say that those are pretty typical and stay the same for all these entry points. So we're going to click on the NDC Springfield that we've already got populated and then click on Copy to All. This now brings up this window, which gives you the opportunity to click on the elements on that entry point that you want to copy to the rest of the entry points in this tab. And if you want to do all of them, you just click on the All button. So let's go ahead and do that. And now you can see that they've all turned black because they've all been populated with the identical information that we plugged into the Springfield entry point here. Now, if you do have to make some edits for some specific entry points, you just highlight the entry point, click on the Change button, and go in there and make whatever change that you need to in whatever one of these tabs. So let's say, for example, that this particular entry in Greensboro has a different freight rate and it's $6 a hundredweight. We can go ahead and change that, and as quick as that, you've got that changed. So what you want to do then is go through that same process for the rest of your tabs. We won't do that in this demonstration, but that is the process. And once you've done all that and you've populated all that detailed information, you can close this part. Then go ahead and click on OK here, and you have just created your new freight table from scratch. Now, as I mentioned earlier, there's a number of ways to do creation of freight tables in the WindowBook software. And you can also make one from scratch if you're in a job that you're already processing and you decide that you need to create a new freight table. You don't have to even get out of that job. You can do it right from there. So let's say that we're in this job and we're working on it, and we want to now create a freight table. It's as easy as going to the transportation view, clicking on Planalyzer, and select Freight Table. And now you can click on the Insert button and go through the exact steps that we just walked through to create a new freight table from scratch. So you can do that right in the job. Now there are a number of other ways to also create a freight table, and another method which is commonly used is to copy an existing freight table and make some modifications to it and then save it as a new one. So let's go ahead and do that. So let's click on Toolbox, Maintain Freight Tables, and let's say that we want to clone this Mail Inc. test freight table here. So we highlight that. You could highlight any of them, but let's highlight that one and click on Copy Table. You can now see that an identical copy of that particular freight table has been created. We can click on that and click on the Change button. We can now rename that to our new test freight table. We can make any adjustments that we want here. Tier weights, comments, calculation options, things of that nature. You can go into the View Freight Table Details if you need to make some different edits, more specific edits in any of these tabs. So once you've done that, you go ahead and click on Close, and then click on OK, and now you've got your new test freight table that you have created by copying an existing one and making modifications. Now, the last method of creating a freight table is to import it from another resource. Let's say, for example, that your logistics provider has provided you a freight table of their own in a comma delimited format. You can import that file into DAT-MAIL. To do that, again, we'll go to the Toolbox, Maintain Freight Tables. This time, we will click on File and Import Freight Table. Here, you want to determine which type of file that you're working with. In this case, as I mentioned, it's a comma delimited or comma separated, so we'll click on that. We want to punch in our origin zip code. Do that, and then you click on the Browse button to select your freight table. And here I've already got one indicated here in my documents under Freight Tables. So we'll double click on that. And you can also put in a name here. So let's say that we want to call this a new imported video freight table. And you can also here again indicate your clients and jobs as we did before, and also your dynamic, static, or dictated as we indicated before. Then click on Process, and just that quickly you have imported a freight table from an outside source. So those are the methods of creating a freight table in DAT-MAIL Toolbox. Again, you can create one from scratch, you can copy an existing one, make edits and save it as a new one, or you can import from another source. Again, WindowBook software, very flexible, very easy to accommodate creation of freight tables. As always, if you need assistance with this process, you may contact our customer support by logging on to our customer support web portal at custhelp.windowbook.com or by calling us at 1-800-370-2410 and then selecting option 6. You may also email us at techsupport@windowbook.com, or you can simply click on Help on the DAT-MAIL Toolbox menu. If you'd like us to create freight tables for you, contact your WindowBook sales representative at 1-800-524-0380 and ask for a professional services quote. And if you're not yet using DAT-MAIL Toolbox for your dropship analysis, log on to our website at www.windowbook.com/request-demo and request your own personalized demonstration of all of the great functionality that DAT-MAIL has to offer.